Hello everyone. So this is going to be a quick video on T.S. Eliot and his long poem, The Wasteland. And the goal here is just to give you a glimpse of how modernism kind of dealt with poetry and literature in general in the aftermath of the Great um, First War. And so this is, I think, is going to be very helpful later when we encounter postmodernism and begin to kind of make connections and comparisons between the two movements. So just a quick overview about T.S. Eliot. He was born in St. Louis in 1888. He felt alienated within the American culture, and he decided to relocate to England in 1914. Now, in 1915, he got married to Vivienne Haywood, and he kind of admitted that one of the reasons was he wanted to kind of expedite the process of getting the British citizenship, right? And he studied at Harvard. He studied philosophy at Harvard, and he was deeply interested in Eastern religions and Sanskrit, which we can see some echoes of in the poem. You know, he was close friends with Ezra Pound. Actually, when T.S. Eliot began drafting The Wasteland, he was stuck in a sanatorium in Lausanne, and he was having a nervous breakdown. The first draft was very long, and so it was Ezra Pound who came in and kind of shortened and polished the final draft. And this is why we see the dedication in the beginning, right, to Ezra Pound, because T.S. Eliot wanted to kind of give him credit in helping him publish this long uh, poem. So, The Wasteland was published in 1922. So, this is the aftermath of the Great War. And a big idea, an overarching theme, is the idea of cultural displacement and rootlessness, which we know, right, from, from his background. T.S. Eliot was already struggling with this idea of rootlessness in the U.S., and that was one of the reasons why he decided to relocate. Okay, so the poem is divided in five sections. We have the burial of the dead, and we can kind of tell. Uh, we can tell. We can have an idea of the theme in this section, right? It's about the anxiety, about the idea of recuperation and making sense of his illness. And we can connect this with what was happening to Europe uh, at the time, right? The idea of regeneration and recuperation after destruction. And then we have a game of chess, which we can read as a meditation on relationships and especially his troubled marriage to Vivienne, because she herself was struggling with mental illness at the time. Then we have the fire sermon, which is an intertext, right, inspired from Sanskrit and the Upanishad. The Upanishad is a sacred text in Hinduism. And so we see the influence of his education there. Then we have death by water, and this is a very brief section in which he kind of meditates on the idea of mortality. And then what the thunder said. And here in this section, we have the idea of dislocation and alienation. This is the tried and true motif of, being lost in the desert and looking for some kind of a resolution. Okay, the first section, the burial of the dead. If you go to line 23, we have this idea, the quotation of the broken images. It's kind of he's Eliot is kind of telling us how this is going to work in the wasteland. It's a collage of broken images, right? Inspired from different fields and modalities, and then In line 71, we have the anxiety of about the idea of rebirth and recuperation. And then we have this is the very last line in this section, line 76. Here we have a very kind of metafictional moment. Metafiction means fiction about fiction, or the idea that we mentioned last time about this kind of self-conscious language, language kind of being conscious of being read, of being manufactured to be read. And here T.S. Eliot addresses the reader directly in this line. Okay, this section is about relationships, and it begins. We have this kind of very interesting juxtaposition between the high life and the common life. This section begins with Cleopatra and Antony, right, and their kind of romance and relationship, and it ends with this kind of more grounded layperson life with Lil, right? There is the wife. Her name is Lil, and she's waiting for her husband to come back from the war, Albert. And so we have this kind of juxtaposition here between the high life and the common life. And this is kind of a reflection of his, reflection of his relationship and his, marriage, very troubled marriage. So we have this collage, right, making different pictures, contrasting pictures, and this collage here is kind of haunted by this idea of pessimism about the lack of order. So we should remember this later when we encounter postmodernism, because the treatment of the postmodernists of this idea of pastiche and fragmentation is kind of different. It became more playful in the advent of the television, and the advent of the proliferation of the image and simulation, and so there was quite this change. I think we should all remember when we encounter postmodernism, because it really offers a good contrast to what was happening in modernist literature. So then we have the section on the fire sermon, and this is a direct inspiration from the Upanishad, the sacred Hindu text. And the main theme here is asceticism, right? Trying to kind of control the senses in a way that is conducive to a healthy mentality. And again, considering his situation, Eliot at the time, he was very much concerned with, his mental health and his spiritual health. This section is very short, I think, Death by Water, and it's about the idea of mortality, and it ends in line 321 when he says, "Consider Phlebas, he was tall and handsome as you," and so this is kind of a warning to the reader and a reminder of mortality. And then we have the final section, what the thunder said. And here again, we have this idea of dislocation, the journey motif, being stuck in the desert, roaming the desert, looking for some kind of salvation, we can say. If you read line 375, we have the idea of dislocation. He mentions Jerusalem, Athens, at multiple places, and we get the sense that he's lost in between. And then we have a small vignette about being haunted, and this also reflects the overarching sentiment in Europe at the time. Right? Europe was haunted by the destruction of the Great War, and so was Eliot. He was haunted by so many things, personal and also kind of philosophical and literary. And so the takeaways here, the wasteland is about fragmentation, small vignettes or images, broken images from different spheres. And then we have the idea of alienation, feeling out of place, and dislocation as well. And again, the idea of regeneration, and it's I think it's helpful here to remember that T.S. Eliot was very much concerned with his spiritual condition, spiritual life, that he actually converted to Anglican Christianity in 1927. So again, the idea of, he was very much preoccupied with the idea of spiritual renewal, right? Not just in terms of location or in terms of physicality, but also spiritual and inward. And then we have the idea, finally, the idea of pastiche, which is, again, it's very important for us to remember this idea of vignettes or collage, making collages in literature. This is very important to remember later when we encounter, when we come to postmodernism and see how the postmodernists treated this idea of fragmentation in a more celebratory fashion compared to the pessimism of the modernists. So this is all I have for you today. If you have any questions, any concerns, feel free to email us, and be safe and enjoy your spring break. And we will see you in like 10 days from now. Bye.